What's up, mud scuffers? On today's show, we're digging deeper into season 3, episode 3 of The Mandalorian. People online are divided on this one, to say the least. One of the friends of this show, Captain John D, said the show had jumped the shark this week, but others have raved about this particular episode. Well, today we'd like to hear your thoughts on episode 3, and we're going to share some of our thoughts, of course, is what we're all going to do is dig deeper into episode 3 of The Mandalorian. So let's dig deeper into season 3, episode 3 of The Mandalorian. So we're gonna kick it off here by just introducing the panel. So I'll go in a clockwise direction. OG55, it is your channel, sir. Where can people find you, and what are the latest stuff that you guys are working on?
All right, you can find me right here on Orange Grove 55. You can also follow me on Twitter at Orange Grove 55. And yeah, basically we focus a lot on like Disneyland, Anaheim stuff, right? But we dip a lot into the film and streaming stuff, like we are today. We also do a lot of C-suite stuff, like the Disney CEO succession and all that juicy stuff. You know, when Chapek was there, we're talking all about Chapek. Now we're focusing on Bobby Iger. So we dive into quite a bit. So check us out on Orange Grove 55.
Yeah. Yes. Nice. There it is. And of course, there's Dre down below as well. Dre, what are you up to, and where can people find you?
Hey, best place to find me is going to be at Vash Sky right there. It's just right there, and you can go ahead and type that in, and it should pop up. I know Jay loves this, so I got to do it. It should pop up for, as Christine Wastelands McCarthy would say, for all the robust discussion right there. And if you want to see me, well, it's going to be on the channel you're watching right now, Orange Grove 55. We have some amazing shows, including this one that you're watching right here. I'm sure this is going to be a banger, but you want to go ahead and hit that subscribe button so you can see my show, Freshly Squeezed, your source for juice, news, and info. Squeezed fresh right from the Grove. There you go.
And Megan, just so you know how deep we dive into this Disney corporate stuff, the Christine Wastelands McCarthy, she's actually the CFO of the Walt Disney Company. So a little inside baseball. So I'll let you know what he was referring to there.
The name Wastelands is for her comment about the wastelands of people at the park that she made. She's the comment about reducing portion sizes actually came up, and she's like, well, we can with the reduced portion sizes, it'll help out our guests' waistlines. So that's why I include that nomenclature right there. So in case you weren't actually familiar with it, there you go.
But I had no context for it. All I know is that those sound effects are making me feel feelings.
They do.
That is good. That is good.
I feel like sometime when I come back to California, we should do like a live show from the parks. I know that's almost impossible, but like that would be so fun to do.
Yeah,
that sounds like a logistical night, or specifically a technically logistical nightmare.
I'm sure it would be, absolutely. Or maybe we could just, instead of going live, we'll just record ourselves and then post it later. But the other voice you're hearing on this show is from my good friend Megan Salinas. Megan, tell the folks a little bit about yourself and how they can follow you online.
Hey, everybody. You guys can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at The Menguin. That's TheMenguin. Currently, right now, I have a Lost retrospective podcast called No Love Lost, where my co-host Will Link loves Lost, and I don't. We talk about it. And I also have a YouTube channel called Silver Screens, where me and my roommate talk about horror things. We just watched Scream 6 this past weekend, and so there will be a video up on our channel. Just basically an hour and a half of just us gushing about how much we loved it. That will be uploaded very, very soon. And I am also featured on her React channel. So that's the YouTube channel Kiaxet. Not my channel, but I'm on it all the time. So feel free to check it out if you haven't already.
Very cool.
I hear that noise and I'm like, I'm about to go on a Star Tour. Which I don't know if anybody's listening and not watching, but I am currently repping my El Hoffer Boba Fett cardigan, which is great because it's green for St. Patrick's Day, and we're talking about and we're talking about The Mandalorian. And I am currently wearing a green Cthulhu dress underneath it because it was one of the greenest things I had for St. Patrick's Day. And Jay also knows how big of a horror fan I am.
Absolutely, yes. Yeah, we can, sometimes Megan and I can't talk about things on podcasts because I'm like, I didn't watch that because it's too scary. And Megan's like, it's perfect.
But I thought it was also appropriate given that there is a giant mythical monster, maybe just kind of hanging out in the depths, just chilling, I guess.
That's true. That's very, very true.
It's like, we're not talking about it. I'm out. I didn't see a Cthulhu down there. I'm leaving. Goodbye.
That is absolutely true. Well, and I want to wish everybody out there a happy St. Patrick's Day. If you've got a green beer in your hand, then you're doing better off than I'm doing, because all I've got is this cup of water with the Hatbox Ghost on it. But you do what you got to do. We're going to dive into episode 3 of season 3 of The Mandalorian. If you want to follow me on Twitter, by the way, you can just follow me at Jay Sherer. Pretty simple. Was able to get my actual name on there. So let's kick it off. I'm going to go counterclockwise this time. So I'm going to start with you, Megan. And by the way, this is a spoiler warning. If you have not seen episode 3, then maybe jump off and come back to this later, because we will be talking spoilers this entire show. So here's my question. It's a simple question. We'll start off with a very simple question and then dig deeper over the course of the episode. Megan, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being best, what is your rating for episode 3 of The Mandalorian?
I'm going to give it probably a 9, because honestly, I was thinking more 8, but I was like, that feels too harsh. Like that feels like it's not giving the episode enough credit. So I am going to go with a 9. That's not to say that it's my favorite episode of television ever or anything like that, but I did think it was phenomenal. My only real nitpicks about it are, like, there were a couple chroma key green screen effects that I'm like, that kind of looks a little silly, or that doesn't look like it's as polished as we normally see in Star Wars. But TV budget, and outside of that, I really didn't have anything to complain about. That was just the only kind of thing where I noticed, and while I'm watching the episode, I'm like, that looks a little off, but just lighting wise. But apart from that, I had a spectacular time.
Nice. 8 is a solid number. Dre, where are you sitting?
See, this is the torn part of the whole discussion, right? And I guess, wait, hang on.
You may dispense with the pleasantries, Commander.
All right, fine. Okay, all right. I'll go honest. All right. Look, here's the thing about this episode. I think, like, from a Star Wars fan's perspective, somebody who really knows this universe, man, you got a lot in this episode to really kind of sink your teeth into. And from that perspective, I give this episode a solid 8, just because of that fact, right? But I got to be objective about this as well. And I got to look at the episode from kind of almost a normie's perspective and how it might be celebrated amongst a wider audience, right? Because this is Disney Plus's signature show right here. And this is going to, prevent churn, right? If it's really, really good, and maybe even get subscribers. So I kind of had to have a little bit more objective hat on. And I got to be honest, I don't know if it played super well. And so because of that, I'm probably going to have to give it a 6. I don't want to give it that number, but I'm probably going to have to rate it there, because people have had some strong reactions to it. And as I was sitting and watching it, I was like, this is awesome. How is this going to play? I don't know if this is playing super well. I don't know if this was executed to the degree to make everybody involved that is watching it fully included. So that's kind of like where I sit with it. But there is some amazing stuff in here. The first opening sequence with the TIE Interceptor battle, that was unbelievably amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody across the board is like, that was awesome. And I have to agree, one of the best Starfighter battles that we have seen from this era of Star Wars, if I might say. So that was really executed very well. And there's, like I said, from a Star Wars fan's perspective, there's a ton to chew on here. And even if you're kind of like even an American history buff, there's some correlations here, as we have done with maybe the religious aspects going for the previous 2 episodes. So really, really cool stuff right here. I'm sure we'll break a lot of this stuff down as we go deeper into the conversation, but that's what I'm going to have to give it. It's going to be a 6.
Yeah.
6, we got an 8. Go ahead, Megan.
Oh, yeah. I was just to build off of that. I loved every little bit of world building about Coruscant in this episode.
Right.
Every time a droid or a robotic voice was just spouting off little trivia facts, I was like, tell me more. I want to know everything about Coruscant. Coruscant is one of my favorite Star Wars planets. Just gimme.
And there was inclusions, even in that the droid that was driving around, the good doctor, right? Right? He had made references to stuff that was in like Star Wars Galaxies, the video game back in the day. And we know that talking to Jon Favreau in interviews, he actually brings up the video game as the old video games that actually came out as a source of inspiration for what they're doing now, and wants to include the people who actually played those games in their work. So like there's like deep cuts put in there, and really kind of, like you said, Megan, it really kind of rounds out the world building of Coruscant, but not just Coruscant, but of the state of the galaxy, which, by the way, was something that was sorely missing in the sequel trilogy that now we're starting to kind of feel out through not only Andor, but also this show.
Absolutely. So we've got an 8, we've got a 6. There are things to like, there are things to dislike. OG, what do you think of this show?
Okay, so here's the thing. I actually agree with Dre in the fact that I don't know how the normies are necessarily gonna how they're necessarily gonna respond to this, right? This episode. But I'm not a normie. I'm a Star Wars nerd, so I'm gonna give it an 8.5. I love the hell out of it. And here's yes, I really loved it. And here's the thing that's crazy is that I was kind of going into it like. Because I didn't watch it right away. I got to be completely honest. I didn't watch it right away. So I saw a lot of the social media reaction. It looked really divided. I'm like, ooh, I don't know if I'm going to like this. I saw a lot of negativity out there. Yeah, I loved it. I loved actually the Dr. Pershing stuff. A lot of people were kind of dismissing that like it's filler. It's not filler. I'm telling you. Look, everyone said the same thing about the space whales in Rebels, and the space whales played it. Remember? That episode is filler. It means nothing. And it was like crucial to the series finale, right?
Absolutely.
Oh, that beautiful, beautiful payoff. Not going to spoil it for anybody who hasn't seen the end of Rebels, but oh goodness, was that beautiful.
Right? And plays a pivotal role in the upcoming stories, as we probably can surmise.
Exactly. So I think this episode is going to be huge. It's not filler at all. And actually, it's kind of, my speculation is kind of doing what I have been wanting Disney to do with the sequel trilogy for a long time. Now, when George Lucas, when the prequels came out, they weren't well received by the fandom. And what he did was he sort of fixed the prequels or made the prequels more beloved through his ancillary material, like the Clone Wars series, right? I think they're kind of doing that here for the sequels. All this Pershing stuff and the cloning and all that, they're kind of filling in the gaps a little bit for the sequels. And I think that by the time this season is over, I think the sequels, look, some people will never like the sequels, and I understand that. I mean, those films do have issues, but I think if they can do it right, it might make those films make a little more sense. It might make those films better. Yeah, I love this episode. I absolutely loved it. I thought the gal who played, and I'm so sorry, I don't know her name. Is it what was that? I'm sorry.
Oh, the actress's name is Katie M. O'Brien. The character's name you're gonna have to remind me of.
Yes,
it's Elia Kane.
Yes,
Elia Kane is her name. Yeah,
she
in
was
the show. In the character.
Gotcha.
Elia Kane was. I mean, I loved her character. I thought she was phenomenal. The actress who played her absolutely crushed. But fantastic episode. I loved it. And Coruscant looked absolutely beautiful.
I'll be honest. I don't know what sort of the internet reaction to this episode was. I think it's important to probably like kind of remind ourselves that like sometimes internet reaction can be a little hyperbolic,
Really?
regardless of
Never.
whether it's positive or negative.
Right.
But the other thing about this, so like if people are a little bit worried about it being inaccessible to quote unquote normies, this is also the third season of a sci-fi show. And technically the fourth season. And if you, because the Book of Boba Fett was technically a spinoff, but it should have been called The Mandalorian, The Book of Boba Fett, rather than the book of, the other way around.
Or 2.5. You can go with that too.
Exactly. Because if you skipped Boba Fett and just went straight from season 2 to season 3 of The Mandalorian, you're like, wait a minute, hold on. There are some changes here. So I don't necessarily think that the third episode of the technically fourth season of a show, gauging it as being inaccessible to people who aren't fans, I think that's kind of unfair because at this point you should be in it. It's like the show is already expecting you not only to have a general knowledge of Star Wars, but also to have gone out of your way to watch another show before coming back for this season. So if normies are having, quote unquote, normies are having issues with it, like, I get it. I hate being asked to do homework from my entertainment. But I kind of think that at this point, if you sat down to watch season 3, episode 3, and you kind of couldn't figure out what was going on, maybe this isn't the show for you.
I get it. I understand. I understand the sentiment. I get it. This is, a show largely geared towards Star Wars fans. But when you ask Jon Favreau or Dave Filoni about this show and who they're trying to appeal to, Jon Favreau will make it abundantly clear, hey, we want to include everybody. We want everybody to come on, even newcomers. And so we don't want to leave them behind. He even talks about how a lot of people became Star Wars fans through the first 2 episodes of Mandalorian seasons 1 and 2. We also know from Disney's perspective, this is a very, very important series for them. Not just about Star Wars fans and how the franchise is actually doing, but also for developing an audience for their Disney Plus platform. This has a little bit more to it. I know it's unfair. I get it. I understand it completely. But that is the situation that they are in. And remember, this is the foundation from which multiple shows are going to be built off, including Ahsoka, for example. The only issue that I might find here is that you have some really, really kind of deep stuff, like, for example, Aftermath and Bloodline, and the sequel trilogy, which, as far as people's necessarily absorption of that content, it is limited as compared to some of the other Star Wars content that has been produced. And so that's, for me, like, that could be I can see how that's not perceived well. And here, I watched the show with my parents. My mom loved it. My dad did not like it, even though he's watching Andor and she's not. That's what's very, very interesting about that. So, I've had several experiences with people who are more on the normie side than the Star Wars side, right? And they didn't like it either. And I would hate to see them drop off from a show, from an episode they didn't like. So that's kind of why I was like, ooh, I don't know if this was executed to the degree to keep them on board. That's why the rating was there.
So what you're saying is your mom has excellent taste.
To be fair, pretty good judge.
I will agree that with the general sentiment that I think season 1 of all of these shows are super accessible, and I think that that's great, being very inclusive to a lot of newcomers. Every bit of Star Wars media could be somebody's first exposure to Star Wars. For example, Return of the Jedi was actually the first movie I ever watched. I had no idea what was happening or who any of those people were. Right. But my parents were really excited about it. And so I was like, okay, I guess I'll sit down. That's Luke Skywalker? Really? Okay, if you guys say so.
And in that way, that's why you give a little meat out to the normies in order to kind of latch on, in order to be very compelled to view more of this world from that perspective.
Season 3 of any show, you're dealing specifically with fans of that property. But anyway, we could go back. we could go back and forth on like whether or not season 3 of any given sci-fi property is accessible to to everybody. We could go back and forth on that, but we've got a lot of questions to get through, so we should probably move right along.
Of course.
Well, and not only that, but I have a.
Yeah, Jay, did you get to give your rating?
Not yet. So let me say this. I have to give 2 caveats before I give my rating.
Okay.
I had just watched, because 2 of my friends had not seen Jojo Rabbit yet.
I haven't seen it. I hear good things though.
Jojo Rabbit is one of the best movies in the last decade. Jojo Rabbit is a masterpiece. If you have not seen Jojo Rabbit, don't watch the next episode of The Mandalorian. Go watch Jojo Rabbit. It is stunning. It is unequal. I love Jojo Rabbit so much. I just watched that. I'm coming off Andor, which Andor is one of my favorite Star Wars properties of all time. It's neck and neck with The Mandalorian. Comparing this episode to Andor is not even a fair comparison, because Andor is that much better than this episode. So I gave it a 6 out of 10, and I'm a Star Wars fan. So let me tell you about some of the things that I think I struggled with personally that I don't think have anything to do with whether or not you're hey, what's up? Drunk 3PO is in the chat.
Yes.
What's up?
Drunk 3PO. There we go. A little bit of a celebratory thing there.
Two shout outs
so much.
Two shout outs to Drunk 3PO really quick. One, he was kind enough to come on my show and talk about his new book, Achromatic Chronicles Blue, which you can go support right now. So you can check out his book. It's what he's doing is really important. And if you listen to my interview with him coming out on Tuesday, you can hear about why it's important, because he's actually trying to help a portion of the population figure out how to see themselves as valuable and have a purpose in life. So definitely go check that out. Check out his interview with me, but also go support him and what he's doing over there. So Drunk 3PO, what's up? And thank you for that.
And real quick, Drunk, if you can link the information in the chat about where to get your book, absolutely link it in the chat, brother.
Do it. Absolutely. Okay, so I'm giving it a 6 out of 10, and this is largely the reason why. I loved the opening sequence. Opening sequence is like classic action Star Wars. It's everything you could want. I actually really enjoy the middle part as well, and then I also enjoy the ending. Here's what I didn't enjoy. Disney Plus series, they have chosen to not have a consistent length of episode. Here's the problem that I have with that. It creates this very strange thing where I'm trying to understand as a viewer where the scripts originated and where the edit finally came out with. So sometimes what I feel like is they wrote a script and then the editors said, you know what, if we don't tag like the Mandalorian, if we don't tag Din and Bo on the front and back ends of this episode, then people are not going to understand it in context. So like we'll cut that out of the last episode and put it in the next episode. And I find that very distracting. As a person who works on stories, like as part of what I do, I find that very distracting, and it's very difficult for me to kind of like understand why some of those choices were made. So you have like a 5-minute section at the beginning with Din and Bo. You have a 35-minute section in the middle with some really compelling interactions, but there's no back and forth between the two, right? Like there's no weaving of that pattern together. So it just feels like you took an episode of a different TV show and just plunked it in the middle of the one that we have. Not that it's not going to matter, and not that it's filler, because I do not believe that those things are true. But it's just, I just find that distracting. It's just kind of odd for me. And I think that the comparison to Andor is, Andor is about as perfect as you can be in the writing and in the performances and in the directing. It is so perfect that if you compare it to something like Andor is not being compared to other Star Wars, in my opinion. Andor should be compared to The Wire and Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul. That's the level that Andor is at, in my opinion. Yeah. And so I just don't think that this is quite the same. This is not that. I enjoyed it though. I'm not giving it a low. I'm not giving it a negative score. I'm just saying I mean, we've seen episodes in The Mandalorian that like blew me away. So
Exactly.
so this is, I'm just saying, of the episodes, I like seeing Dr. Pershing. If you listened to our show last week, one of the things I said was that I felt like Dr. Pershing's story had sort of like faded into the background of this series. And I was like, what happened with that guy? So I enjoyed seeing him again. I thought, this is awesome. They heard me. They're like, yeah, okay, he has a problem with it. Throw it out there. But I also think that this is what's interesting about these series is that I feel that if you want to check out the chat, Drunk 3PO has his link in the chat, so go check that out for us. These series have this odd thing where, and MCU is doing this too, and it's really starting to get disjointed because they're starting to introduce plot lines that maybe don't even apply to the show you're watching. Like, so for example, one of the things I complained about, or I even surmised, that the pirates were going to come back into this. But then I heard somewhere else that somebody said that the pirates aren't going to come into this show at all. They're just going to be seen in Skeleton Crew. And I was like, whoa, that's so weird though. Like, why would you throw the pirates in? So I'm struggling with the way that they're crafting their narrative arcs and where they're putting things in those arcs. That's what I'm struggling with. Now, most people, so I'm coming at that from a writer storyteller angle. So most normies may be like, dude, who cares? It's cool. But that just is something that, I had a professor tell me in college. He's like, I'm going to ruin movies and TV shows for you by explaining like how some of these things work. And it's just hard for me to get over. So I still like this episode. There's still some awesome things that we're going to talk about as a part of this episode. But for me, it is a 6 out of 10. So.
It's interesting because Jon Favreau actually struggled with this very same thing in Iron Man 2, right? Iron Man was just a kind of a solo story. It was just kind of isolated. It was obviously with Robert Downey Jr.'s character and his relationship with the audience, and there's a dynamic kind of arc there and all that kind of stuff. It works very, very well in isolation. And then when Jon Favreau was given the task of setting up an Marvel Cinematic Universe, some hints were thrown in, obviously, with Iron Man 1, but they really loaded him in there in Iron Man 2. Kind of struggled a little bit, right? Story kind of became disjointed, and Jon Favreau didn't have the best time with it, which is why he kind of walked away from it, right? And you're seeing that take place a little bit here, to your point now, Jay. I'm glad that they're kind of going out and setting all this kind of stuff up, and how it intermixes with so many different, things that will be, become very, very awesome. And especially when you're like going back and watching it all in a row, it's going to be fantastic. It's great. But when you're in the season, when you're in the series and you're watching them once a week and so forth, and you have to know a lot of stuff that came before it and a lot of stuff that comes after it, it can get challenging.
I think that's one of the, you've touched on one of the reasons why a lot of people in the wake of Marvel's success have sort of failed in replicating that success. If you prioritize world building over character and storytelling, you are absolutely setting yourself up for failure. I highly recommend, sorry to go off on this tangent, but I highly recommend listening to a podcast called Are You Afraid of the Dark Universe, which is two people sitting down and taking the discarded idea of the dark universe from the failed attempt at it from Universal from 2017, and essentially pitching movies back and forth to each other in what could have been. And they talk about why the dark universe failed and why a lot of other things that again tried to spin up in the wake of Marvel's success have failed, and their own struggles trying to make these pitches of like, we want to tell a good story, but also there is this need to set up world building and things like that, and there's a pull, a push and pull with all that. So it is a fascinating podcast and a really, really fun time. Go listen to Dark Universe fan fiction. It's great.
Yeah. That's perfect. That's perfect. Good recommendation.
That sounds pretty good. And it's very applicable to our audience who is tracking the Epic Universe development out there in Florida, which will have a Dark Universe themed land. So that will be fair. Yes. Yeah. To be fair, it is not necessarily the Dark Universe that...
no, but the Universal Monsters.
The Universal Monsters. That's correct. Yep.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. See? Okay. See? I'm telling
She's
you,
on
OG, I'm
board.
telling you.
She's
She's
on
on board. Okay. All right, sorry, I do apologize. Jay.
I love my
No,
horror
no,
stuff.
you're all good. You're all good. I love this. So I'm going to pull back for a second here. And the first deep question that we're going to talk through is, and OG, you started to hint at this in what you were talking about. And that is, we haven't seen a ton of the New Republic. We've seen a little bit of the New Republic, but mostly in the sequel trilogy, we've seen the Resistance. We haven't seen the way the government's set up. We don't see how the New Republic necessarily operates. But as you said, Megan, we get to see Coruscant. Coruscant is amazing. They get really deep into Coruscant, going to different places. So the New Republic, we get this glimpse into how it's being run and how it's operating as a government. Dre, I'll start with you. What are your thoughts on the New Republic?
Okay, so the New Republic is very, very interesting. I had a sense of what the New Republic was going to, or I was conditioned to have a sense of what the New Republic was going to be like with my experience from the EU. Right? They're not taking that approach. They're taking a much more realistic approach to the actual New Republic itself, following the Galactic Civil War, which traumatized some folks, right? And obviously, the people who were part of the Rebel Alliance are not looking to necessarily establish a very centralized government in the way that the Empire was, and fully understandably, right? I mean, obviously, there were some flaws there, and there were some issues there. But it really kind of reminded me of this, not only just the story of the New Republic First Order, which I'll get to in a moment, but also the 1776 declaring independence, and then the Articles of Confederation before the United States Constitution was ratified in 1787, written in 1787, ratified in 1789, right? There's a kind of a 10-year gap there, and you're going, what happened there? Well, the Articles of Confederation happened, and as part of that, it was obviously not a very centralized government. It was very decentralized, right? So you had there were some problems assembling delegates, raising funds, regulating commerce, and all these kind of things. It just could not actually function. And it was susceptible to corruption and so forth. And that power vacuum obviously wasn't very good. The government needed to be stronger. It needed to be more centralized, right? And that's where you get the actual Constitution itself. And this is kind of what we're seeing here in this. It is susceptible to infiltration. It is susceptible to this kind of decentralized plan. And in Bloodline they actually detail this. There were a faction of people who wanted a centralized government, and there was a faction of people who wanted a more populist government, right? And didn't want almost any centralization at all. And that's kind of the dynamic that they're setting up here with just in little ways, but it is actually there. It's interesting because Coruscant is largely unchanged from the actual prequel trilogy, right? I mean, it's as what you remember, but a number of events have actually passed, and it's kind of stunning to kind of see that this core world has not been affected, and they haven't. Everybody's still rich, and that's why you have the people there with the doctor going, Rebel Alliance, New Republic, Old Republic, Empire, no difference to me. We are rich anyway. And that's kind of what they're doing there. And yeah, I mean, the elites are going to be, let's just say they're going to be taken care of by the powers that be because, well, they, fuel the war machine or whatever, right? And that's what we actually see here. And that was a really kind of fascinating thing. Like I said, it kind of gave you a big perspective of what was actually going on during this time. But, obviously there's a first order that has to actually set up themselves from within. And I think that's what they're hinting at as well. And it's really kind of fascinating to see those pieces actually take place. But the New Republic, to your question, Jay, is kind of not how we expected it to be, even during this rehabilitation program that they have for these previous Imperials. It's very interesting. Gives me kind of Operation Paperclip kind of vibes. If you know that kind of piece of your American history from the 1940s, right? You had German scientists from the 1940s that were integrated into the United States, and the United States government, right? And they actually helped with the moon launch. Some people know of a former German scientist who actually assisted with the construction of Disneyland and Walt Disney World and so forth. So that's a well-known story. But this kind of this doctor being rehabbed and so forth, it's a really interesting thing. They get designations with numbers instead of names. That's a very kind of Imperial thing to do. They have these kind of social workers who are rehabilitating them, but they're not humans. They're droids, right? It's this very dehumanizing kind of thing, and it's what you necessarily wouldn't expect from the actual New Republic. We also get, I believe it's detailed in Aftermath, how the Rebel Alliance fleet was actually destroyed right after its usage conquering the Galactic Empire in the Galactic Civil War. Well, okay, well that's obviously very problematic for what we actually know in the future. However, this actually kind of goes back to that American history thing where they didn't actually want the founding fathers didn't want a standing army. Why? As John Quincy Adams says, we do not go abroad in search of monsters to destroy. They felt that a standing army could only be used for bad, and so that's why they wanted to rely on the militia for actual defense. Well, obviously, that doesn't work when you have a First Order with a whole bunch of Star Destroyers looking to conquer the galaxy, as will take place in the sequel trilogy. So that kind of, all that groundwork that they're laying right there to kind of point out the flaws in this whole thing. And we've had allusions to it before in previous Mandalorian episodes. People be like, oh, well, he's going to face a tribunal or whatever, and it's like, that's a joke, from previous stories. We saw that it's like, we have Republic credits, and it's like, those don't spend, those don't fly. So people, and you could see even in episode 1, what is it? It's mentioned in episode 1. For Navarro, that it's like, we didn't want a system of bureaucracy over us. The Empire, the New Republic, whatever. We wanted to be in isolation. We wanted to be independent. So it's very, very interesting how they're kind of showing the New Republic in a light that I think most people would find surprising given the events of the Galactic Civil War.
Fantastic.
Yeah, that's a great answer. You basically said all the things I was going to say.
And I got to follow that up? Jay, this is crazy.
You got to follow that up. But before you do, I do have one question. Clarifying question. Does anybody here know how far in advance we are right now from the sequel trilogy happening?
I believe Mandalorian Season 1 is 9 years away, and this is 2 years, so 11 years from the Battle of Yavin. Is that right? Megan, maybe you can offer something there?
I got nothing.
Yeah.
I don't know. I also struggle with the amount of time in between the prequel trilogy and the original trilogy. I very much struggle with that timeline. I'm like, how old is anyone supposed to be? Princess Leia is in an episode of Rebels, but then so you see Luke from a distance, and he appears to be much, much younger than her, but they're twins. I don't understand. Just
younger in maturity.
I have long since stopped trying to figure out the exact math in between specific trilogy arcs of this series. I'm like, even if I somehow deduce the number, I'm sure something will come along to just dispel that entirely.
So it's Mandalorian. The first season takes place 9 ABY, which was 9 years after the Battle of Yavin. That's episode 4, or the 1977 episode of Star Wars, right? So 9 years from that, 5 years from the Emperor's defeat, and then this is 2 years after that, I think, or maybe like 3 years.
Yep.
And then how many years until The Force Awakens from where we're at right now then?
Ooh, let me get that.
Yeah, that's because the interesting question I was thinking about as I was watching this episode, as it relates to the sequel trilogy and how it relates to the New Republic, is that literally we are going to see the complete annihilation of the Hosnian system, right? Like in the sequel trilogy, it's not that far between Starkiller Base just destroying everything.
Okay. Yeah. Force Awakens is 34 ABY.
34.
Okay.
34 so ABY.
It's a good 11. Number of years away then.
Yeah.
Yes, it's like
almost
20 years away.
Yeah.
Okay.
Wow. Okay. That's good to know.
That feels a lot more accurate. Yeah.
Look at Dre with the skills, by the way.
Look
He
at
came
this,
up with that
man.
answer in like 3. Not only did he give us long answer where he's like quoting John Quincy Adams, but then boom, he just comes in. This is ridiculous. Dre just gets
Wow.
the,
Gentlemen,
Dre
I'll
gets
see
the All-Star
myself out.
award.
Come on, come on back. It's okay. Don't worry.
This is fascinating. Well, okay. Here's the thing. So we got about 20 years until the sequel trilogy. That's actually kind of fun in my opinion, because now we have all this time to sort of set this up. Like Dre mentioned, right? All this groundwork being laid with the New Republic. Well, ultimately they're going to fail, and the solution is going to be the First Order. And this is what I was talking about when it comes to ancillary materials, sort of making the sequels better, much like the Clone War series made the prequels better.
True.
There's an opportunity here. There's
Absolutely.
a big opportunity. And one of the main complaints about the sequel trilogy was we didn't have
Palpatine
any
returned
background.
somehow.
Right,
Yeah, exactly,
exactly.
right?
And now we're finally going to get a little meat on them bones, you know, and we're going to find out more than likely through probably Mando how the First Order came about, you know, maybe not this season, maybe it'll be over many seasons, who knows? But I don't know. I think this is very, very interesting, and I think they did a really good job with setting the tone of this new Republic. Really liked it. I loved how Coruscant, it was very much stuck in the prequels. I don't know. It just felt like I was watching like Revenge of the Sith or something. It was just fantastic.
Yeah.
Overall, I think they're doing a really good job. It feels like already sort of like a system that's sort of already kind of on the brink. It doesn't feel like it's kind of working on all running on all cylinders. Even right now, I feel like there's a little bit of a slight destabilization there with this whole thing. I'm looking forward to it. I think it's gonna be fantastic, but we'll see. I think it's gonna be I think it's gonna be really, really interesting to see how this all sets up into that First Order and how that came about.
Yeah. I only have one thing to add, then I'll kick it to you, Megan. Because there's one piece of this episode that I found very fascinating, and that was that the writers, Jon Favreau, and I can't remember the other guy, they seem to indicate in this episode that whoever you were when the Empire was over everything is the same person that you will be. Like, in other words, your character is not defined by the government structure you're under. Your character is a personal thing, and that character will play itself out however it's going to, no matter what system you're under, right? And I found that very interesting, and I actually found this to be, in my opinion, this is going to be controversial for those who like the prequel trilogy, but I think that this might be the most politically complex Star Wars episode that we've ever seen.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because like the politics at play here they're not, I mean, Andor has some political inworkings, but it's also more tied to the individual characters. This is more like, look, this is the way that the political system works. And by the way, political systems can change, and it doesn't really affect the individuals all that much. The rich people, like you said, Drake, the rich people are still rich people, man. They show up and go, we never had to fight. We just show up to this place and like listen to people talk, and we put in a vote, you know? So it's just like, this is very, very fascinating to me. And I really enjoyed that aspect of it because it showcased this massive population, 1 trillion people on Coruscant. And that's just one planet of this giant galaxy, right? So I really enjoyed that aspect of it. I thought that was really well done from the political aspects, which can get boring, but this was shown through like, how can we show characters in the midst of this political structure in a way that's compelling? And I thought that was really, really, really cool. So Megan, what did you think? What do you think of the New Republic here?
Yeah, I'm actually very much reminded of the first season of The Mandalorian, where, you know, it very much felt like our cowboy walking into the saloon where there are a bunch of ne'er-do-wells, because the government, you know, the law doesn't oversee this part. The powers that be turned a blind eye to the wild, wild west.
I can bring you in warm, or I can bring you in cold.
Yes.
So it reminded me a lot of, that's where the show sort of started, is because it's a very, very big galaxy. The galaxy is a big place. And so for the New Republic coming out on the tail end of this war, yes, they came out victorious, but they were always this ragtag team of underdogs. And setting up infrastructure in the wake of winning the war is a very, very challenging thing.
Yes.
And so you can definitely see how they are strapped for time, resources, and most importantly, manpower. As you pointed out, there's a lot of dehumanization, not out of maliciousness. I think it's literally just because they have so many things to deal with and not enough people in order to make them happen. That's why droids are doing essentially what should be social service work and government service work, jobs that should be handled by individuals who can understand nuance and who could actually talk to somebody as opposed to just, getting a question and then immediately hitting it with a yes or no.
But that also requires a bureaucracy.
I mean, yes. And you're always, but we also see that on the human side of things because Dr. Pershing is working a job far below his capabilities. And anytime he tries, it's so funny because I do think he could have tried a little bit harder to get his point across, but he was so concerned with, just wanting to kind of keep his head down and not wanting to make any waves, which is a completely understandable sort of state of being to be in, given his background and everything like that. Like, I completely understand, but at the same time, like, his boss was like, well, I guess you could fill out this form. I've never heard of anybody in your program ever doing it, but like,
King was also in his ear telling him, oh, the New Republic, they're not going to do this. They're not capable. They're not really, this is the only way to help them. So that's why he didn't pursue those ends, right?
The best lies are the ones that are couched in truth. She's absolutely right by saying that the New Republic is struggling and that there are opportunities being missed because they are just so, spread thin in regards to manpower and time and energy. Going like absolutely breaking the law, maybe not the best way to go about like fixing those discrepancies, but it's very easy to like there are a lot of interesting sort of morally gray sort of questions that are posed by this. Like it is against the law, but like there is the potential capacity for good. What's sort of better, just kind of and she even says like following orders blindly is how we got into this mess in the first place. So you're absolutely right in terms of like seeing how the different government structures that the world is going through all those changes. Like in the original trilogy, very much just fighting the fight against fascism, whereas the prequel trilogy kind of looked at like, well, how did fascism come to be?
Yes.
And here now it's like, well, now that tyranny has been overthrown, what sort of problems can arise in when you set up a new government in the wake of tyranny? What sort of struggles do the people setting up the government sort of have to deal with? Like, and how do you avoid falling into the pitfalls of just becoming another fascist system?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's so much, like they said, there's so much nuance here, right? There's so much like there are very complicated issues that you kind of have to deal with, and I do like how the episode actually kind of approached those things. I wish it was extended a little bit more so that everybody can grab onto it. I do, because there's so much here, and like for me, I'm enthralled with this episode, right? Yeah. I'm like super into it. But, I just remember people that, saw it and was like, ooh, I didn't like that at all. I probably won't be watching for a little while. And I'm like, oh, that's horrible. That's terrible.
I get so disappointed when I hear that take because just personally, I love when television shows that or even just whatever long-running property I'm into or whatever book series I'm reading, I kind of love when we put a pause on things and we focus on a group of characters that like are in a completely different realm, and we get it's, in my opinion, it's a good way to get some of that world building without it feeling like what we were talking about earlier with the pirates. It's a really great way of rounding out the world and focusing on different aspects of the world that maybe we don't necessarily get if we're hanging out with our space cowboys,
And that's what the sequel trilogy needed. That was kind of the ironic part. We never got a state of the galaxy. We never got we were just told, the Star Destroyers are going all over the place and they're destroying, conquering systems. And it's like we were told all that information, but allow us to see it. There was even a scene filmed with Princess Leia, or General Leia at that time, right? And how she was, she wanted resources in order to establish her resistance and fight the First Order. She thought that was a big threat, and she went to Hosnian Prime to actually champion that cause, and she was denied. That would have been great to kind of establish the kind of the situation at this time, world build, all that. They cut that out, and it's so kind of frustrating. So it's really great that this series is kind of dived into that a little bit and is bringing that out. I think we're better off for it, and I do think these issues will be play a prominent role, not just in this series but in beyond.
Yep, absolutely.
I think there's also a subtle message. The last thing I'll say for this question, I think there's also a subtle message in here that is a really important one, because the world has become so good at deconstructing things, right? Like the world has become awesome at deconstructing. And I think this show is subtly suggesting, because think of all the YouTube channels that are out there deconstructing everything there is, saying how terrible this is, and how what's very difficult to do in any kind of setting, whether it's your own personal belief system, whether it's a creative endeavor that you're pursuing, a business you're pursuing, it's very easy to deconstruct. It's very difficult to reconstruct. And this is showcasing that, right? Like if you think, it's easy to throw stones, but if you're the one in the glass house and you have to build the glass house again, almost impossible to do. It's very, very difficult. So I liked showcasing that. I thought that was a mature thing to do in this show, which is very cool. So question 3, I'm not sure if I sent you this question, Megan, because I added this one late. So I'll go to you last on this one, and I'll start with you, OG.
Sure.
Some are speculating that the TIE interceptors at the beginning of the episode may be from Thrawn's armada, the last vestiges of what the Empire would be at this point in time.
The Imperial
What do you
remnant.
think about this? The Imperial remnants. What do you think about this, OG?
I think there's a huge possibility of a Thrawn connection, because we saw, I think it was episode 2, if I'm not mistaken, we saw those space whales, and the space whales have a huge connection to Thrawn. So they are planting seeds, and they're kind of giving you a little bit of hints along the way with that whole situation. Look, I'm not saying for sure, but I mean, it's looking like that's what's going on with that. Absolutely. And I couldn't be happier. I love that. Love it.
That's awesome.
I think you there is something to be said about this, Jay.
Right.
I was just thinking about it because I didn't get this question either. But now that I'm thinking back at it, have any of you guys even heard of the video game Rebellion? It was like a kind of a point and click strategy game, not very graphical intensive, but it was like basically you were like the head of the rebellion and you were trying to fight the Empire on a galactic scale back in like the late 90s. Okay, pretty ambitious for that time. Anyway, Grand Admiral Thrawn was actually part of that game, and a lot of the characters from the EU were integrated in it. Grand Admiral Thrawn, at least in that game, and I think that was consistent in the EU, but and maybe even established canon, but I'm not sure. But he was his one of his proficiencies was advanced research in technology and in like spacecraft and fighter craft and so forth. Remember what they said about the TIE interceptors. Ooh, never, those are much more maneuverable. Those are much different than what we actually usually are up against, right? That would be consistent with Grand Admiral Thrawn's fleet, for example. Just a little bit of a nugget there if you want to go ahead and chew on that. And it's one of the first times we've ever actually seen TIE interceptors featured in any Star Wars material. So this is let's say a new threat or a different kind of threat. Even I believe Bo-Katan actually makes reference, oh yeah, I've handled Imperial warlords before, but nothing ever like this. So This is definitely a different threat. He also had a big appreciation on, like, say, like cultures of other races and so forth. Yeah, Megan, you know what I'm talking about. Like
He was a big art
Twilight
guy.
big art guy, Twilight guy. Well, what does he actually target if it is Thrawn? Bo-Katan's palace. He knows how important that is to her clan. Everything that she had was there because it was passed down from generation to generation to generation. There was so much art, there was so much culture there. That would have been a place of extreme importance for Bo-Katan herself and her clan and her connection to the Mandalorian royalty, so to speak. And that was targeted, that was destroyed. That was a key kind of point right there, which is kind of why I think Bo-Katan, she might be down for a little bit of acceptance into a clan so wholly different from her own. But we'll get to that conversation, I'm sure.
Really quick question before I get to Megan. When was the first appearance of the TIE Interceptors? It was a video game, right?
The TIE Interceptors, I believe, were first featured in Return of the Jedi.
Were they in Return of the Jedi?
I believe so, yes. But they make very, very rare appearances. For example, that was to defend the second Death Star, which was key to Palpatine's plan. Palpatine was on the planet. TIE Interceptors would absolutely be there in that instance. But they're very, very expensive. So they probably wouldn't be featured anywhere else unless as part of a fleet of someone of great importance.
Now, real quick before we go, you mentioned him on the beginning of the show.
Oh,
yeah.
We got the captain in the house, and we do have a little graphic for him. I'm gonna go ahead and play that real quick.
Captain John D.
That's the first time I've ever seen that graphic, and that is awesome.
That is a very impressive graphic.
We love Captain John D. He's family here at OG55. But go ahead, Jay, if you want to do the honors of reading. He was gracious enough to send us really generous donation. So if you're the host today.
Absolutely. And what John D had said on Twitter, I mentioned it at the beginning of the show. He had said that the show had jumped the shark at this point. And I think that this is good. This is a counterbalance to opinion to those who really enjoyed the show and say it's like, there's some people saying it was a 10 out of 10, right? And he says, hey, OG55 fam, in his humble opinion, Mando season 3 sucks. It lacks soul, story, and verisimilitude. Throwing a Robert Meyer Burnett term in there. I like that.
Very nice.
Yeah. The season is broken so far due to the Bo-Balorian 2.5. The episode's meant to start Mando season 3. It's tanking harder than Best Life, which is funny. For those who know, you know. Those who know, you know. By the way, he did a video on Best Life that is one of the funniest things I've ever seen. And he says, "Fix it, Favreau." So I think that's the opposite opinion, right? Like if you look at this, and let's track back really quickly to Mandalorian season 1 and season 2. I can't even remember an episode of those that was like even partially disappointing. Like every new episode that we got was like, it's amazing, right? Like, so I do think that if you're looking at this show from that standpoint, knowing what has come before, this season seems like it's off to a rockier start than those seasons seem like they were off to, and that is the counterpoint, I think, to what we're talking about. So it's giving some fans what they want. It's also giving some fans like this cognitive dissonance of, but what you gave me before was, I mean, just think about it this way. We got, I don't remember what, I think it was Mandalorian season 2, right? Where we got Ahsoka fighting through that sequence. Like two sequences in that show were stunning. The sequence of her in the forest, and then also the sequence where she's fighting. I can't remember the lady's name that she's fighting, but she's fighting on the bridge. Those sequences were 10 out of 10 sequences, right? Yeah. I don't think we had a close one. The intro part of this episode, I think, was close to a 10 out of 10 sequence, but those sequences were like cinematic masterpieces, right? So I get that opinion. I get that opinion for sure. But Megan, what do you think? Do you think these TIE interceptors? You think they're part of Thrawn's armada?
It would make me so happy if they were. Like, because I mean, we know that we're getting an Ahsoka series, and I assume that it's, you know, we're going to get some Rebels resolution from that. And you know, if she and Sabine end up finding Ezra, that, I mean, sorry, I probably should have dropped some spoiler warnings for Rebels. But yeah, this, if Thrawn is going to be sort of the big bad of this season, then that would mean a lot of, you know, resolution from the ending of Rebels, which I absolutely adored. I loved how he was portrayed in that series, and I know it's a kid's show, but I like, in no way, shape, or form did they sort of nerf, I guess, the menace that character should have, the kind of gravitas that he has, and the level of sort of sophistication that him and his schemes bring to the table. Yeah, I was thoroughly impressed with his presentation in Rebels. I was thoroughly satisfied with the way Rebels resolved his particular story arc. And I would absolutely love it if The Mandalorian picks up those threads of Star Wars Rebels and just goes, oh yeah, we can keep going with these, and just goes on its merry way. I would be so happy if that were the case. Also, live action Thrawn, very, very cool. That would be amazing.
Oh, yes.
Oh, yeah. Incredible.
That would be one of those, who is that character at the end of Book of Boba Fett? The gunslinger, right?
Cad
Bane.
Cad Bane, right? That would be one of those kind of moments, but even bigger,
Absolutely.
because that would resonate with so many fans who, hey, the Tron trilogy did mean a lot to them back in the 90s. So that would be also very, very cool.
Yeah. Thrawn getting his inclusion in Rebels, I think, was really satisfying for a lot of long-term fans. But I think bringing that character to live action, I think brings, not that I think that this is a legitimate take, but I feel a lot of people would probably feel validated by having his live action appearance, because there's still sort of this stigma when it comes to animation. I mean, there's been a lot of talk about that with, you know, the Oscars of late, and sort of Netflix cutting a lot of its animation program, things like that. Animation, even though it's a completely wrong take to have, is a legitimate medium and art form, and not in any way, shape, or form tied to the age of its audience. It, you know, you can have animated stuff for kids and animated stuff for adults and animated stuff for everybody. Just because something's animated does not mean it is solely for children. And it does not mean that it is not smart and intelligent and a piece of art.
It's a medium, not a genre.
Exactly. Thank you for succinctly putting that. But that being said, with that, with my personal opinions on the matter being presented out there, I do think a lot of long-term fans would feel really, really, really good about him having a live action appearance, in the same way that a lot of people were really excited about Ahsoka getting her live action debut.
Sure. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I think so, and I don't know. You know, as the kids say, it hits different, right? When you see it in live action, it does. This is why Japan has a better culture, let's say, right? It's just Japan understands. You know, Japanese anime is just as relevant as you know, Hollywood cinema, for example, right? You know, there's no distillation there, which is unfortunate. But to have Thrawn be ushered in here, I think that would make a lot of fans really, really excited. So I can't wait if that actually happens. A programming note, by the way, I think California Dreamin' OG had a super chat there talking about the indie refurb.
Oh, okay. Now, California Dreamin', this is a Star Wars Mando episode, but
right.
Thank you so much for your super chat. The new indie refurb was disappointing. That's the Indiana Jones Adventure at Disneyland. It came back from a big refurb. Some new effects were added. Thank you so much, California Dreamin'.
Right. I just wanted to make sure that we did acknowledge that for
Absolutely.
Sure. It's just,
Absolutely.
You know, maybe if we have time at the end, we can talk a little bit about it. But for now, we have to keep Mandalorian centric right there for sure. Jay?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I wanted to end Dre's comment by saying no cap, dude. And it just show how youthful we are on this show.
Yeah, exactly.
No, we are not. You don't come to us for trends in youth culture. So the last thing I'll say about Thrawn is that I did not watch Rebels, right? And I've been spoiled a million times, so I know all the things.
We're done professionally.
Yeah, I need to leave. I'll show myself. And part of the reason for that is just because I have had a very difficult time. Some of my favorite Star Wars has been animated. So like the last 4 episodes of the Clone Wars, I think are some of the best that Star Wars has ever been. But I also think that some of the Clone Wars is some of the most disappointing Star Wars that I've ever seen, talking specifically about the animated series. And part of that is just because I think that there was an effort to kind of make it very accessible to kids. And usually sometimes that felt like it was overdone. I started Rebels, couldn't get as much into it. So I'm giving you that context just to tell you that I love the character of Thrawn, but I have no clue how he shows up in Rebels. I only know Thrawn from the previous books. And I wish I had stuck with Rebels a little bit longer because I know it did get darker and it got a lot more adult near the tail end of that series.
It is worth sticking with it.
It is.
Okay.
It is 100% worth sticking with it.
There's essential Bo-Katan kind of backstory as well there too, so which is very, very relevant to what you're watching right now.
There's some dark saber stuff.
Yes.
Oh,
well,
yes.
And I've caught up on some of the there you go. I've caught up on some of the videos online, so I'm familiar with that stuff. I just didn't watch the actual series. So my opinion on Thrawn is that Thrawn is. This is what I've always thought about Thrawn, not having seen Rebels. Thrawn's intellect was so great that he could essentially take on any level of Jedi and arrange the pieces on the puzzle to be able to be successful in that engagement, right?
Yep.
And so I think that as we look at, there's not a lot of Jedi going on, but there is a component of the Mandalorians that wants to recreate its own empire, and having Thrawn as a way to kind of like butt up against that is really cool. The only thing I'll say is that I think that the TIE interceptors could have been, I do think it probably is Thrawn, and we talked about that last week as well. And Dre had a very convincing argument about why it would be Thrawn. Here's the only thing I'll say is that we definitely haven't seen the last of Moff Gideon. And even in this episode, they threw out didn't he escape from the tribunal in one way, shape, or form? I would not be surprised if this is actually related to Moff Gideon instead of Thrawn. Mm-hmm. I think it's Thrawn. If you say, hey, put a bet on one of them, I'd put the bet on Thrawn. But Star Wars has at times teased something that's not quite as big as we thought it was going to be. Not as bad as MCU has done. So we'll see. We'll see how that all shakes out. But I would love it to be Thrawn. That'd be amazing. Question number 4. I will start with you on this one, Megan. In the popsicle scene, I don't know how else to describe it. This is really fascinating. Yeah. And by the way, I don't know the terms well enough, but there's didactic sound, and then there's and there's in-world sound, and there's
diegetic and non-diegetic.
Yeah, there you go. There was playing on Coruscant music from the sequel trilogy, a version of the music from The Force Awakens,
March of the Resistance.
The March of the Resistance was playing, and I found that really fascinating. So what did you all think of that? Megan, start with you. Like, what did you think of the inclusion of that music in the scene?
I'll be honest, until you sent the question, I didn't notice it.
Wow.
It was something that went completely that I did not observe in any capacity, but I'm glad you did point it out, because I love when shows do that, when they play around with motifs and leitmotifs. And I first and foremost, I do not know a ton about music. The more I learn about music, the more I realize I don't know a damn thing about music. I highly recommend a YouTube channel called Sideways. This guy breaks down musicals and a lot, and like from a musical theory standpoint, it's phenomenal. But I love being able to recognize themes that I listen to on movie scores over and over and over again, and sort of the emotions that it evoke for me personally. Like, I love being able to recognize that, and when you do hear those musical stings and like and how they're used in storytelling, that can be extremely evocative and extremely effective storytelling, where you're really using the full medium of filmmaking to its fullest extent, because that, the wonderful thing about film and television is that, they use the combination of acting, lighting, visuals and sound, like all combined together to tell a story. And so when you use music to tell a story in that way, I think that's a very, very special thing. Having said that, I did not notice. So it was kind of lost on me. But I love that, because playing that music very much falls in line with what we think. Her name is Elia, right?
Yeah, Elia.
Yes.
Yeah,
Elia Kane.
It's very much like what we think she's trying to get him to do, is to sort of rebel in, like, for a good cause, even though it's a trick. And so but also then, playing this music that essentially comes from the future with Coruscant, where it's like, oh yeah, this is a city looking towards the future, I guess. So there's a lot you can dig into. I wish I had gone back to re-listen to it to see if I could have picked up on those things. But yeah, definitely worth mentioning and worth pointing out, and fun to dig into.
Let me just jump in here before I get to you guys and just say that I have a little bit of an opposite take than you do, Megan, because like here's my problem with it. Is that Galaxy's Edge made it a point not to play any Star Wars music because you were supposed to be immersed, right? Like we're not going to play any Star Wars music because you're going to be immersed in the world of Star Wars. Well, if the world of Star Wars has the music of Star Wars in it, then how in the world does that make any sense? So that kind of threw me for a loop a little bit. The other thing that threw me for a loop a little bit was that knowing that Star Wars has used its music primarily for the audience and not in universe particularly, and that you have this legacy of John Williams being at the helm of all that music. What it felt like to me was, especially as they're walking along having a popsicle. So here's what's weird about this scene. I love this scene for what it showed us about Coruscant. I love this scene for what it showed us about the two characters interacting. But every part of this seemed like it was encapsulated in this realm of cheesiness that was almost like like Obi-Wan and Anakin trying to go to the clubs where the death sticks were. And it was kind of like, it's getting a little over the top, guys. Like it's become kind of farcical in your it's a little campy, which Star Wars is campy. So don't get me wrong. Like in fact, I love another podcast you guys could listen to. Blast Points is one of my favorite Star Wars podcasts, and they're super into the campiness of it, right? So they would be like, "Oh, we love it," but for me, it pulled me out, because that's the difference between Andor. You do not get any campiness in Andor whatsoever.
I was telling Dre that today on the phone. I was telling him, you don't see any of that. It's nowhere to be found.
So your issue with it was that the music was diegetic specifically.
Correct.
Okay,
Yes, exactly.
Not the use of the music specifically, but the fact that it was in-world music.
Correct.
It was a carnival arrangement, though. So that music, that is kind of supposed to be there for that purpose. You never hear the music blared out in the way that it is arranged for us on screen, right? So, like for example, Solo, right? Solo had the Imperial March actually playing in the Imperial Recruitment Center that Han Solo actually signs up for. I believe they use the Imperial March again in some animated piece. I can't quite remember at the moment, but it's always arranged in order to fit its setting. So I was able to kind of like, okay, I'll go along with it. It's supposed to be here. Now, if they can find a way to actually play some music in Star Wars Galaxy's Edge, I don't even care if it makes sense. Get something playing in there, guys. I will echo your sentiments on that shit.
Yeah. So OG, how did you feel about it when you encountered it?
I actually liked it. And I liked it because it's kind of doing what I want them to do. Is I want them to I want them to have that connective tissue with the sequels, so we can kind of fix the sequels, like I said before, with the Clone Wars did to the prequels and what have you. I think the existence of that music is not an accident. They're telling you something. And they're very much tying it to the sequels on purpose, right? And we know that look, they talk a lot about cloning, right? I mean, Palpatine, right, and Snoke and all that stuff. That all ties into the cloning. So the fact that they included
she has his research now,
and you know the fact that they're putting that music in there, they're telling you something. It's a little bit. They're little breadcrumbs, I think, and I think that's kind of exciting. I like that.
Very, very exciting. There's a couple of comments in the chat that I wanted to kind of point out before I expand my point on this scene right here. Thrawn is an amazing strategist. He is absolutely Captain John D. Yes, I will agree with you. Snoke clone, that's kind of what they're headed towards. Yes, very much so. Maybe Emperor as well. We will see how all these things actually play out. Alia says Thrawn and Ezra survived because Purrgil tentacles broke the windows. Yeah, so how did that actually happen? We know for a fact that those windows are shaped that way because if those windows actually ever break, they get shut down, kind of like what happened with General Grievous, right? When he was on that Confederate starship, right? When he burst out the window, and you had a kind of a blast shield actually take hold and maintain pressurization. So we know that is a thing in Star Wars, right there. That's all I'll say about that. But it will be very interesting to see how maybe Ezra and Thrawn are brought up again in this series, which I think that's going to be the case. When it comes to this scene in particular, they're showing a couple of things. One, Elia's fascination with red, that has always in the Star Wars universe been a dark or sinister association, right? In terms of canon before. She also makes reference to this in the biscuits. So the Doctor likes the yellow biscuits. She likes the red biscuits, right? So that's kind of playing with that and kind of showing, ooh, she's not all that she appears to be.
I was watching this with my roommate last night, and she was like, hold on, is this episode literally come to the dark side? We have cookies?
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yes.
That's a very interesting take right there. But that's also in stories before, Jay, I think you might know this very well. Food has always been used as a temptation. Even going back to the original story of Adam and Eve, that's always been kind of a way to get you to go to the dark side.
Capping off this segment of the episode with her taking a bite of the yellow biscuit is just was brutal. I loved it.
That was
great. Fantastic stuff. We will get into that scene, I am sure. But it also kind of shows you that not everything is, it's always something that's amiss right there. That rock, which from what I understand in canon is supposed to be kind of a big deal, and has been utilized in series and so.
Touch the rock. That was really, trust me.
Trust the rock, and it's like, ooh, it breaks down, it cracks down you like the Empire would, right? So it's. It's again showing, this New Republic and this Reformation system established right here. Not all it's cracked up to be.
Well, and sure. I was going to say too, I love that element of that. This is the only piece of the actual planet that can be seen on Coruscant. I thought that was a really dope element. I love that. I absolutely loved it.
I love it acting as foreshadowing because she's like, hey, touch it. You can trust me. And it's played off as like a fun moment of them like forming their friendship. But it is telling you right then and there, she has no issue and no difficulty lying to your face. And Megan, it's going to get you into trouble.
The actress's name, again,
Katie M. O'Brien. I actually had several years ago. I got the honor of being able to interview her when she was on a show called Z Nation, which is a zombie show. Right. Jay, I don't think it's up your alley, but very, very nice, very, very wonderful person. And so getting to see her go on and do things in Star Wars, it's super cool because she 100% deserves it.
She plays this really, really well. It's a very hard role to play. You kind of have to there's more behind the eyes kind of thing, but you have to be kind of suave and cool and get somebody in front of you, this doctor, to kind of accept you. But there's always some kind of, you don't quite trust her all the way, but she has to emote that while also doing her role. She does that very, very well.
I spent because I was lucky enough to get to interview her once. I spent the entire episode going, I wish I could trust her. I wish I could trust her. Like,
Yep.
I know that the heel turn is going to come. I wish I could trust her. Like, that's how good her performance is.
Oh,
it's like,
very
no,
good.
I want to believe you're good, but I know you're not.
And Elia is absolutely right. It's actually it's a tip of a mountain on Coruscant, and they kind
Yes.
of built this whole little thing around that peak. It's the tallest mountain, I guess, on Coruscant. So that's the only thing that shows, the actual planet, on Coruscant. So thank you, Elia.
It's a point of great importance, as is illustrated, with the whole droid thing. But also, from what I understand, it is referenced several times in other media. So it was kind of cool to see that as well. And hey, space popsicles! When can we get them in Galaxy's Edge? Come on!
Okay, can I be real? Can we be completely up front right now? Like,
Yes.
I kind of got I don't know, the way they were they kept emphasizing how they were licking those popsicles. It was really cringy to me. It was just I don't want to see this guy sucking on this thing. It's come on. It's dude. Every time the camera went to them, it was they were, I don't know. I just didn't like it.
A little overstated.
Come on.
What I need Disneyland to do is just go ahead and invest whatever sort of money they need to send over to Square Enix so that we can get sea salt ice cream at Disneyland from Kingdom Hearts. Please, Disney. Please. That would be the best.
That would be nice as
Absolutely.
That's so much to ask.
Yeah. I can't remember what I feel like I was going to pick up on one of the things that you guys had said about that particular. Oh, I remember what it was. I was going to say her betrayal is so subtle and so good. I watch these episodes usually twice because I watch it once for just me to take it in, and then another one for me to come up with questions.
Right.
In the second time I watched, I realized that everything that she does is a manipulation of Dr. Pershing.
Yeah.
So when he first walks up to their table, she says, instead of calling him by his designation like they're supposed to, she immediately creates separation between him and everyone else by going, hey, doctor. And so she calls him out as a doctor, as someone of import, but also separating him from the rest of the people who have to be labeled with letters and alphanumeric, things. So I found that to be really, her betrayal to be very interesting. And like you said, Megan, when she takes a bite of that cookie at the end, after saying she likes the red ones, but she's eating his favorite as he's getting mind flayed.
Man,
I'm
brutal.
telling
that
you.
was so savage. That was that scene was oh my God, it's brutal. That's so cold. And my mom's like, what? And I'm like, if only I could explain. Go ahead, OG.
No, I love it. And it was savage as hell. As hell.
Yeah,
and that's the brilliance. That's why I love this episode so much. There's so much brilliance in it. There really is.
There's a lot of really good things.
It's stuff like that where you feel the gut punch of that moment. And that's why I'm like, how can you give this episode a 6? Did you not get punched like I got punched?
I did. Gotta be objective.
Yeah. It was I don't like to spend the entire shows complaining, but it was some of the other things. It was that's great, but also this. And I'd also seen some, if you do go and watch Andor is what you're talking about loving the entire series. And so it's just it's a little bit different. You've already turned the dial up to 11. And so I've already experienced what that is. And it's hard for me to
Jay, if you are looking for some media to punch you in the face, I have some horror recommendations for you.
Nice. I will take them.
I hope you're not talking about a mind flare dial. I hope that's not what you're talking about.
All right. Yeah, exactly.
How terrifying. I know we need to move on, but goodness gracious, him waking up and going, no, I know exactly what this is. And they're like, no, we're nothing like the Empire.
It's fine. I've had the process before. It was quite lovely, and it's a trap, and it's well, that's obviously a reference. It's a trap right there, but the other way around. Pretty funny.
Perfect. It was perfect. All right, so question number 5. This is tying us to the sequel trilogy, but also tying us to the prequel trilogy. Yes. And that is that the New Republic is against cloning. In fact, they prohibited cloning. Of course, Dr. Pershing's research is all about cloning. He spends the first part of the episode saying about how that could have saved his mom's life, and so he's very passionate about it.
Right.
So that gives us two interesting viewpoints, and it brings up two questions. The first is, was the Jedi Council in the prequel trilogy wrong to go along with Palpatine's plan to build a clone army? Because if cloning was basically what they're indicating is the Kaminoans were basically doing something completely egregious, but that the Jedi Council kind of went along with it.
Yes.
The other question that I have for you guys is, so I want your perspective on that, but I also want your perspective on, is the New Republic against cloning only because it was misused, or overarchingly is Star Wars trying to tell us that there are issues with cloning that we need to be careful of, or how are they presenting this to us in such a way that we should understand it? So Megan, why don't you start us out?
Cautionary tale. Yeah.
yeah.
First and foremost, I think Star Wars over the course of the last 25 years, probably, and I'm not as familiar with the extended trilogy, but certainly from the moment the prequels, hit theaters, I think Star Wars has taken a very big interest in looking at the Jedi and going, hey, maybe they're not as good as we think they are. Or at the very least, maybe they're not always making the quote unquote right choices. And I 100% think that the choice to use the clone army is kind of a morally reprehensible one. Clones are not treated as people. And yeah, Jedi make friends with a lot of the clone soldiers, but at the end of the day, like, the clones are not, they don't get any agency over their own lives. And that is a morally reprehensible thing. Slavery of any kind is a morally reprehensible thing. And just because you homebrew a clone for that express purpose, that isn't fair. As they say, the ethics of cloning are complicated. And I think if you have, people that you have enslaved to do a specific thing, or that you like, who don't get a choice, who are robbed of their agency, I think that's wrong. And granted, I know that they needed an army to fight the droids, the droid army, but yeah, it was a morally dubious choice at best, and a morally reprehensible one at worst. I feel like there's a counter opinion, and I fully respect that, but I think it's fair again to say that Star Wars as a whole, over the course of the last 25 years, or whenever episode 1 came out, has taken a big interest in just sort of looking at the choices of the Jedi, and the Jedi Council in particular, and being like, hey, they didn't make the best choices. They allowed, I know this might make some people a little upset, but to quote Luke Skywalker from The Last Jedi, they allowed Palpatine to rise to power. Like, they sat on their laurels and allowed this to happen. And I think he's kind
Luke
of
Skywalker or Jake. I can't remember which one actually made that statement. No, I'm joking. I mean, yes, I think that is a very kind of controversial thing, and that's something that Luke himself was trying to rationalize, right? That the Jedi, maybe not always a force for good. But I look at it this way: when you're in the moment, there are not always great or good options. There's sometimes bad options and least bad options, right?
The lesser of two evils, for sure.
Correct.
And it is certainly, easy for people, 20 years down the line to look back and Monday morning quarterback, and say, well, you should have done it this way. You should have done it that way.
I look at this, and this is going to get into some controversial territory here. Here we go. But as we, are you gonna
get canceled, Vash? Is that
no,
what you're saying?
But as we do on this show, OG, well, we have to go balls to the wall sometimes, right there. Okay. Here's what I'll say. All right. So I look at this kind of like, I look at it in two ways. But the first way I kind of look at it as it relates to your Jedi question, right? Were they moral for actually using the clone army? It's kind of like, were you moral in dropping a couple of bombs on another nation, right? It's like, ooh, that is not good at all. Nobody wants that. That is horrible. And the atrocities that happened there were absolutely horrible, right? But it got that nation to stop, and they weren't going to without that. And millions and millions and millions of more people would have died had you not made those decisions in that moment, right? So that's the kind of thing that you have to that's horrible. We cannot do that. And because of nuclear arms proliferation and so forth, we have had no major power go at war with another major power ever since. So it's one of those things where it's like, not comfortable with it, but it's not all a net negative. I'll put it that way.
War is an evil thing.
It is. We're in the Star War, right?
And to your point, in terms of the second part of that question about is this trying to tell us anything specifically about maybe is this a cautionary tale? I think there is no easy answer to that question, but I think it goes back to exactly what this episode is trying to say in terms of there are. And we face this every single day as technology continues to progress. With new technology come ethical questions going, hey, there is a world of possibility that comes with every new technological advancement, but in the wrong hands, or sometimes even well-meaning hands, that technology can be used to hurt people.
Dave Filoni actually makes this point specifically. He was talking about the lightsaber, and it's like, you have to understand, we look at the lightsaber very differently than people in the actual Star Wars look at it in Star Wars, right? So the people in the actual universe themselves, they look at it as kind of like a samurai sword, right? It's just like, it's not that impressive because, well, you might have this code, you might have this way of thinking like the samurai actually did, right? But then rifles come out. And how do those same samurai, adjust to that huge change of tactic, right? Kind of similar to the blaster in that way, and how the Jedi have to kind of reformate in order to kind of integrate this new technology. We see, like with the Death Star, for example, that changed the game entirely, and everybody had to change as a result of it. To your right, Megan, as these new technologies actually come out, how do people adjust? How do people kind of rationalize? With the cloning question specifically, it's kind of like, have you ever seen a movie called The Sixth Day with Arnold Schwarzenegger? Right?
Not in a long time.
Okay, a long time, right? But the whole plot of that movie is Arnold Schwarzenegger is cloned in order to.
I got it mixed up with a different Schwarzenegger movie. I was thinking of End of Days, but you're right. There's a cloning one.
Right, there's a cloning one as well, right? And it's like, and I believe, I think Ian McGregor also starred in a cloning type film,
Island?
right? Where they were harvesting organs. As part of the cloning thing? Okay.
That was The Island with Scarlett Johansson.
Right. Okay, there you go. Thank you, Megan. See, we need her more. We need her on the shows more, so I can get my obscure references out. But so Dr. Pershing actually talks about cloned, let's say, body parts or organs,
Her
right?
heart specifically, yeah.
Yeah, and so it's like, that's kind of like a dubious thing. How do you actually do that? How do you actually perform that? What is the process in doing that? It's kind of almost, this is my second point, it's kind of like stem cell research, right? Where it's like, there are some ethical questions about that. And I think coming out of the Clone Wars, where the clones were, you're right, Megan. They were these, and the Empire viewed them this way. They were like these pieces of tech that were used to conquer the entire galaxy at one point. And, people would kind of have some maybe disdain for that. There would be an apprehension towards the usage of clones in that way and for that purpose and what they did and so forth. We get a little bit of sense of this in the Obi-Wan Kenobi series, right? When he's actually on that planet and he passes by a homeless clone, they had been discarded by the Empire because they were old tech. I believe there's a reference in an animated piece that says, you look at a clone and says, I'm not fond of using used equipment when it comes to the clones as it relates to the Empire. It's very, very fascinating.
That's not even touching on Order 66, where
right.
Literally a switch was flipped and it made them kill their friends against their will. That's
right.
awesome.
Oh yes. And this kind of gets into that. So how would the galaxy, if you were just like a person living in like the Outer Rim, and you had this happen to you saw this happen to the Clone Wars, so the core worlds, right? And you saw the war that took place with the Confederacy and then the Empire and all that, you would have a very different look on clones coming out of those experiences, and I think that's reflected here. But to your point, I said least bad options and so forth, the Jedi and how they use the clones. The Confederacy was going to take over, and their allegiance was to the Republic. They had to protect it at all costs, and unfortunately, that blinded them to the bigger issue, which Sidious played that perfectly. So, that's kind of...
Played right into his hands! That's what I'm saying!
Right into his hands! As, well...
Everything is proceeding as I have foreseen.
Oh, gee, thank you for that drop. Freaking awesome.
Yeah, no, and Vash, you're absolutely right about this. It's evil. It's a lesser evil for the greater good, basically, right? Like, so yes, war is absolutely evil. It's abhorrent. It's horrible. But at the same time, if you didn't have this, where would we be, right? And it's kind of like, it's kind of like a farm in a lot of ways. I know everyone's probably thinking I'm OG's crazy, but it's kind of like a farm, right? Like farmers, they raise chickens. And ultimately those chickens have to be killed to feed their family. Okay, well, that's a horrible thing. Killing any animal is absolutely horrible. But if the farmer didn't do that, then his family would starve, right? So it's kind of like same kind of idea where it's like there's this evil act. Go ahead.
They were genetically built to be subservient. That's kind of the interesting thing. It says this in Attack of the Clones. So, OG, to your point, it's kind of like a farm where you're talking about maybe a lesser being, and that's kind of like a morally dubious thing too. Go ahead, OG.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely like that, and they do a lot of that with our chickens too, right? Where they kind of,
factory farming and so
exactly.
forth. And,
it's horrible. But if you didn't have that, people wouldn't have food, right? People could starve and what have you. So there's that ethical gray area there, right?
Poor Rex.
So,
I know, poor Rex. I know. It's interesting that you say this, OG, because I was talking to a farmer one day and I was like, man, I'm not a vegetarian or by any means, but I'm like, man, how do you do this? How do you go about, raising this stuff and then, having to slaughter? And he's like, look, listen, I was raised on a farm my entire life. I remember my little, getting a calf, right, milking her, feeding her, and seeing her grow into a full-size cow and having really a connection with her and seeing behind her eyes and seeing that, there was life there beyond just the animals that we actually talk about. And then when she's actually, she gets injured or so forth, and well, you got to go out there and you take the knife and you do the deed. And it's like, whoa, that's a crazy thing, but it's there's that kind of level of separation. Actually, it's very interesting because as part of the training for I believe Navy SEALs or maybe Green Berets, they're actually given like a lamb in which they have to they have to have a connection with, and they have to care for it and so forth. And then they have to be able to slaughter it at a certain point, even though they have grown that connection, just to kind of like harden them. And, you can take a life without being connected to it, let's say. And it's a crazy kind of thing right there. And unfortunately, the clones are victims of this in multiple ways, even including their existence. People would have, they would look differently at clones. And it's really, really unfortunate. But that's kind of the beauty of what's being explored here.
Yeah, I think that there is something very deep and meaningful in an exploration of what it means to be at war and what it means to have what it means to work on your character in an imperfect world, right? Like, so you are an imperfect person in an imperfect world, and how will you behave because of it, right?
Yeah,
and I think that Star Wars, one of the things I think that Star Wars, one of the reasons why it relates to so many people is because it showcases a lot of those scenarios where it asks a lot of those questions of like, well, how far is too far? And I think actually what's interesting about Star Wars 2 is it started out with the original trilogy being a fairly simple story. Like Luke just does the right things and everything works out great, But over the course of time,
Lucas has said it's a kids movie, you know?
Yeah, exactly. And over the course of time, Lucas kind of said like, well, I'm an adult now. I want to kind of change it up. I want it to be very political, and I want the Jedi Order to feel very much like I don't know if he said this on record, but I want the Jedi Order to feel very much like the Roman Catholic Church, where they got very political, they got overly political, and all of a sudden it wasn't about the core tenets anymore. It was about the political structure and how we were going to interact with the political structure. And pretty soon we're fighting wars, right? Like, and so I think that I think there's and Dre, you've already brought up two different examples of how it relates to American history and what we faced with American things, right? And so I think that there's something very deep to be explored here. What happens when you are put in these situations? What happens when you are Dr. Pershing and you have an intent, but your technology has been found out and it's going to be abused, right? I mean, I had a neighbor. I shouldn't say which neighbor it is, but I had a neighbor this week get raided by a SWAT team, right? And I can now see all the reasons why they raided that particular house, and I think that when you start to look at like how people behave, it's like, oh, it's interesting because I could actually see why someone would get themselves into that kind of situation. They shouldn't. But all of a sudden, when there's two conflicting goals going on, right? We want to stop World War II. Do we nuke cities or do we not nuke cities? And what does it mean to do that? What does it say about me if I choose to press that button? I mean, that's a scary thing to have to think about.
Oh, yes.
We get to see a movie about Oppenheimer this year, which I'm really looking forward to.
That's going to be good.
Yeah, it's going to be amazing. So I think
but
it's
this
really
also reflects, Jay, to your point. You know, it reflects another person in Star Wars lore that we've seen kind of have this duality and kind of make tough decisions. Ooh, if I just embrace the dark side, I can save the people that I love. I can stop people from dying, right? It's all that kind of stuff, to your point, Jay.
Yeah. Well, no, and that's a really good comparison, because what it ultimately shows you is that if you continually put yourself in a place to make even more horrific choices in light of what you're trying to achieve, you can become a supervillain. I mean, Darth Vader is the number 2 villain of all time on the AFI's list of 100 heroes and it's 100 heroes and 100 villains, and there's a reason for that, because he's terrifying. And if we unearth why he got to be that way, that is also really terrifying.
It's the Thanos principle, right? I'm gonna snap half the universe because only half of us can actually survive. I have to do this morally horrible thing and be justified in doing it. And some people actually agreed, which was kind of scary. It was a little bit like, ooh, and that's why the Russo brothers went with a different direction with Thanos in the second one. But Megan, go ahead.
Oh, yeah. I was just going to ask Jay, who was number 1?
Oh, yeah.
Number 1. Oh, my gosh. Who was number 1?
I'm just thinking, who beat out Darth Vader?
You know. like some of the top 5 were like Hannibal Lecter and I'll tell you what, I will look it up. I'll after I ask this next question, and I'll get you the facts on that.
Sure. And Michael, he says, but Vash, he was the chosen one, and you're absolutely right, Michael.
You were the chosen one.
Exactly right. But it's also
You're going down a path I can't follow.
There you go.
Yeah. When it comes to cloning, just make sure that you take a path that's the higher ground.
Yeah.
Double meaning there. Okay, so the next question I have for you guys while I look up who is the top villain. Elia Kane, however you say that, presents as someone who's out to help Dr. Pershing show the New Republic that cloning is okay. But as the story plays itself out, Elia betrays Dr. Pershing for reasons that have not yet been revealed. And so, OG, I have this question for you. We'll go around the horn, but OG, what do you think Elia Kane is really up to?
That's a tough one. This is a very, very tough one. What do I think she's really up to? Well, I think that she's obviously evil. You can tell with her obsession with Red and what she did to this poor guy. I don't know. I come back to me. I gotta think. I gotta think.
Okay.
I'm kind of at a loss with this one.
Megan.
Okay, so before I go to you, Dre, just so everyone knows, Darth Vader is at number 3. Hannibal Lecter is at number 1. Norman Bates is at number 2. So there you go.
Hannibal
I don't know if I would
Lecter
agree
and
with
Norman
that.
Bates beat out Darth Vader?
Nah.
Interesting.
I mean, here's the thing.
Norman
Here's the
Bates
thing.
is
This was
interesting.
created a few years back. So there have
Fair.
since been series that have been created about those two characters, which I think are weaker than what we've seen created with Darth Vader. So,
Now,
I-
Megan,
go ahead.
I'm going to go with it, throw it to you first because you raised your hand. So I'll go to you, and then you can go back to
I
me,
was
and then
in
we'll go back
class.
to.
Yeah.
I think it was actually a comment that somebody put in the chat earlier. I'm trying to find it, and I apologize, but yeah, I think this is basically how we get Snoke.
Yeah,
I
Captain John
think
Dean
Oh,
said
okay.
that.
that was it. That was it. Yeah, I think this is how we get Snoke because. But even if that's not like sort of the immediate, what's immediately down the line, the Empire could use this technology for literally any sort of nefarious purpose. In my head, what I immediately think of is like, oh, they're going to do their own super soldier.
Interesting.
They're
idea.
going to pull a Marvel villain and make a super soldier before we get to Snoke. So that's kind of where I'm thinking it'll go. Although, if we are getting Thrawn, putting this technology in Thrawn's hands is a terrifying possibility. So
Yes.
we'll just have to wait and see. But that is my 2 cents.
one of the things we talked about last week, which would be interesting if it relates to Alia's comment, was that I am under the impression that it will be used by somebody. I wasn't thinking Thrawn as much. We talked about Thrawn a little bit last week too, but it'll be used by somebody to, like the computer games, to manufacture, because they were going to get the technology and they were going to use it on Grogu. So the technology would be used to create potentially Sith acolytes that are force powered from people who were not originally force powered.
That's what
Right.
I said. Super soldiers.
Yeah, exactly. So we're right
Could
there.
be.
We're right there with you. So Dre, what do you think?
Well, it's kind of like I made reference to it last time, but the Jedi Outcast, like Reborn, Shadow Troopers, we've seen this idea kind of played with before. And cloning, at this stage in the game has been played with a lot in the EU. I think Luke was cloned at one point using his severed hand. I think the Emperor was cloned at one point. I think Thrawn was going to be cloned at one point. I think that was detailed in the Visions of the Future.
You get a
Timothy
clone,
Zahn's-
and you get a clone, and you
Yeah,
get
right?
a clone.
So we've seen kind of this play before, and we know that clones are coming. Is the Emperor one of them? Is Snoke? Snoke is heavily seen as being a piece of that kind of clone technology and so forth. So it's like we know it's coming right here. It is like you said, Megan, and Jay. I mean, Pershing's work is very vital. It could be used for so much in the wrong hands, which is why. The the lead baddie for season 1 and 2, Moff Gideon. Okay.
Yeah.
Moff Gideon was so he wanted Grogu so much because he knew that the kind of the specific research that Pershing was doing, which was grafting DNA and so forth and using a midichlorian donor, was so valuable. He understood that had a lot of potential, and that's why Kane. Remember, she takes a liking to him even before she first meets him. In the introduction of that storyline, you see Pershing actually giving a speech in the same room, by the way, that Anakin is told what is it?
Have you heard the tale of Darth Plagueis the Wise?
Yes.
Wise, right? The same room, that same whole thing. Which, by the way, there's some allegories to be made there too. Well, Kane walks in there. They're showing you that's her mission right there, is with him. So I think there are powerful players who have taken a liking to him. That's also why I think Pershing has been assigned to data input or whatever with the whole army and so forth. He's like, oh, that's interesting. A man of your talents here. That's kind of weird. Even the guy is like, they could probably use you in better ways than right here. I think there has been a level of corruption in the New Republic, and Kane is very much a part of that. And Pershing was singled out specifically, not just by task, but by his work in this field.
It will be very interesting if we get sort of a Hydra sort of storyline where it's a bunch of these First Order people basically being Hydra agents in the New Republic.
Operation Paperclip. I'm telling you, folks, look it up. It's a thing.
Here. Go ahead, OG.
I was gonna say, no, I actually misunderstood the question. I thought it was more about like what's going to happen to her specifically, not the big picture. So I do apologize for that. But yes, I said earlier on in the show. I mean, it's all tied to that cloning, the Snoke, the Palpatine. That's the technology. That's what they want. That's what they want from this. And it's all leading up to Palpatine's return and Rise of Skywalker and all that good stuff. So that's absolutely her.
That's a great point, though. We see it a lot with these very ambitious people who work for the Sith or who work for the Empire. I think that ultimately she's going to be hoisted by her own petard. She's gone out of her way to put herself in this position of power. And she's now gotten this very valuable technology. I think that she's going to use that to climb the ranks of whatever remnants of the Empire happen to be here, or whatever sort of shape that the First Order is currently taking. And much like a lot of very ambitious people, I think, one of these days somebody's going to be like, "You're too ambitious. That's dangerous for me." And she's going to get a knife in the back.
Yeah, Megan.
Or a lightsaber to the front.
You mentioned something that I kind of wanted to ask the panel here. The last scene there, before we move on to the final question, that last scene there, when you have, she's turning up that dial to 11, so to speak, right? What do you think the goal is there?
Why does it go that high?
Because, exactly. Well, they've reused Imperial tech, so there you go.
Well, that's what I was gonna answer that question, Dre, in my portion of this answer, because as Megan just indicated, I don't think she's working for the New Republic at all. I think she's a sleeper cell that's in it, because what do we know? We know there's a couple things we know. One, she's not playing by the rules of the New Republic at all. Yep. Even though she seems like she's working for the New Republic, because it seems like what she's doing is she's outing
entrapment. Yeah,
exactly. She's outing people who are like up to no good, but really it's entrapment. And one of the things that I think what she's doing is she is basically saying, I needed this guy to be able to show me what kind of instruments were needed for the cloning. And once I know that, this guy's gone, because now he knows too much. Yeah, exactly.
Knows too much.
He's got to go. He's got to go. He's got to be mind flayed. He's got to go. The dial's got to go to 11.
Because I thought you could be mind flared. I mean, there's a lot of, let's say, New Republic propaganda in his head right there. He could be mind flared and wipe that out too, and make him an ally afterwards. It could go off and do some interesting things.
That's true.
But I do agree with you, Jay. It does seem like they're tying up loose ends, and I don't think she's working alone. I think she's being assigned. Go ahead, OG.
Yeah.
Oh, well, hold on. You can't leave us on a cliffhanger, Dre. Assigned by who?
Assigned by people who would like to see order brought back to the universe. It could be Moff Gideon, because we know that, hey, he just got off scot-free. It was actually mentioned as kind of an aside in this series, because let's be honest, as this New Republic has no teeth and is easily corruptible, which is why she's able to infiltrate in the way she is. Exactly. Could be Moff Gideon, could be Thrawn, but I think she was assigned. Go ahead, OG.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's interesting. Yeah, the mind. I was thinking the exact same thing. He knows too much. Now I gotta wipe him out, right? I gotta wipe off his memory.
I got the info I needed, and now I'm the only one that knows it.
Yes, exactly. So that's where she's at with that. And I think they did a really brilliant job at setting that whole scene up, actually, because they make it very clear in the beginning with the Mon Calamari guy. Oh, no. We do it at just the right decibel level so it doesn't do any damage to you, and yada, yada, yada. And then
quite refreshing.
Yes. And it's perfectly safe, right? And then for her just to like crank that all the way up, like, oh, man, it's like, you can just feel it hit you in the gut.
Funny. They did something really funny with that guy's voice too, because I could have sworn that it was either one of two people doing the voice. It was neither, but I could have sworn that it was either the same person who does the voice on Gravity Falls for Seuss, who's like a ridiculous character.
Alex Hirsch.
Yes,
Alex Hirsch.
yes. I thought it was either like him or it was Jim Gaffigan. Like I'm like, oh man, they both have this vibe that like, and that was kind of perfect because it was like that guy does not have in his head anything that could be, and he's already been mind flayed, so he doesn't have anything that could be like super dangerous. And probably even if he had thought that it would have been dangerous, the mind flayer probably convinced him it wasn't, right?
I think
and he's carrying that with.
I think Cara Dune in a previous episode talks about, oh yeah, you know, they hook me up to a mind flare. So it's like, you know, this is some bad stuff here. It's very, very kind of interesting. I think Jay, you hit the nail on the head to have that kind of character do it. That added to the creepiness. It added to just the horrific nature of what was actually going on, and you know, as the New Republic engages in morally dubious things itself.
Exactly. Well, we are down to our last question, and I think that this is another future reflecting question, because one of the things we talked about last week was what's the arc for Bo-Katan going to be, right? And so in this question, we get a little bit more information about that because Din and Bo finished the episode both redeemed, since they both bathed in the living waters of Mandalore. The armorer even invites Bo into the covert. What significance do you think this has for the rest of the show? Because one of the things we talked about last week, just to set the table for those who didn't listen last week, is we talked about the fact that the armorer is super fundamentalist with her belief system. Bo-Katan is super deconstructed of the Mandalorian belief system. She's not really into the whole creed thing anymore. She kind of just thinks it's ridiculous. And Din is somewhere in the middle, but kind of leaning towards the armorer. So this was a little bit of a surprise for some folks when I started listening to people on Twitter, because I don't think anybody expected for this early for Bo-Katan to like be trying to be drawn in towards the fundamentalist side of things. So what does this tell you about the significance of Bo-Katan's character journey and her character arc, Megan? Like, do you think that where's she headed from here?
Well, first and foremost, I just want to say that, like, kudos to the actress, because even without being able to see the character emote, you could tell from her body language just, oh God, I've accidentally joined the cult. Oh no.
Yeah, you could. Yeah.
And actually to that point, Megan, Katie Sackhoff actually said that today. She said, I really enjoy playing with the helmet on because it means I have to act in a way that like I have
body
to act
language.
different.
Yeah, because she's used to acting behind the mic, right? And so she can emote and do all these kind of things with her body, but she has to be really tight when she actually plays Bo-Katan in real life.
It's one of the reasons why I really like masked performances, because it does require a certain level of like bodily control and like fluidity. It's one of the reasons why I find a lot of horror performances to be so interesting, because you have to do so much with your body without being able to speak or without being able to like physically emote with your face. But
like old
neither
school
here nor there.
stagecraft.
Exactly. Neither here nor there. But for what this means for Bo-Katan specifically, I don't think that by the end of this season, she's going to, quote unquote, be a fundamentalist. She might be more open to sort of her religious roots, because she's clearly very disconnected from it. Now she was like, yeah, I did all the rituals when I was a kid, got lots of presents and everything like that. Doesn't really mean anything. There's no magic, there's no curses, like it's not real. So I think she might come out of this experience a little bit more spiritual, maybe like, I don't know, maybe in touch with the Force in a way that like she wasn't before, because like, I don't know, because she knows Jedi, she knows that the Force is a real thing. So maybe in some way, shape, or form, she can like be like, oh, like you don't necessarily have to be a Jedi to sort of be connected to the Force in some way. I still don't see her like becoming a fundamentalist, or becoming the leader of the sect. What I do sort of see is this as an opportunity for her to unite the different factions of Mandalore, because that is something that Mandalorians are constantly struggling with. She can unite them under her banner, so to speak. Like, there is an opportunity right now. There's a mythosaur just hanging out in the depths on their planet. And so there's this thing here. And now the fundamentalists kind of view her as redeemed. So there is an opportunity here to sort of get them on her side without necessarily becoming a full convert. Like, I very much see this is how she brings them back into the fold of the rest of the Mandalorian clans. And maybe kind of get them to sort of step out of the past ever so slightly and say, hey, you're right. We have lost the way, but you need to meet us halfway, that sort of thing, and sort of brings compromise to these people who have refused to change, while also still highlighting the fact that, hey, fighting amongst ourselves is what got us in this situation in the first place. It's what made Mandalore weak when we could have been united. And so, like, I see that as an opportunity of, like, I think what ultimately this is going to end is her being the rightful leader of Mandalore. Whether that, like, they can, I don't know if they'll find a new planet or if they will just continue to be dispersed amongst the stars and it's just generally recognized that she is their leader. But I see this as an opportunity to unite the different Mandalorian clans. That's the sort of long and short of it.
And I think you're absolutely correct on that, because it's like we saw with the last episode with the whole, like, the breathable air on Mandalore, right? They're setting this up. I think we talked about this, Jay, last week, actually, a story point where it's like they're setting this whole thing up where it's like they're going to try to reestablish Mandalore. So this whole last scene in this episode is kind of showing, like you mentioned, Megan, like the bringing together all the various factions and what have you, right? So they're trying to rebuild it. I think that's the direction they're definitely going in, big picture, in my opinion. Absolutely.
It's interesting. Note too how Bo-Katan didn't tell Din Djarin about the mythosaur, right? It's just, she just wanted to know, did you see what I saw, kind of thing.
Right.
And it's interesting. Went to took a film course when I was going through college there, and they reiterated the point. Every single thing you see, including every single frame, is there for a reason, right?
Absolutely.
It's absolutely part of it's you how you absorb content, basically, is through the camera. And so what's the last thing that Bo-Katan actually sees right before the episode actually ends? Well, it's right here. Go ahead, OG. Go ahead and show that. That is the last image that she sees. The icon of the mythosaur, right? So she is surprised that she has been accepted into this clan, and she's surprised how accepting and accommodating that they actually are. But I think she sees this as an opportunity, to your point, Megan. I think she kind of is like, okay, if I win that Darksaber in combat, and if I go back and I actually tame this mythosaur, I can actually unite the Mandalorian factions. And as part of this clan, actually reform the church, right? Reform the creed. Because they did war with each other. There were the fundamentalist types and the people who didn't necessarily adhere to the way, let's say, and that did cause some division. That did cause some strife. It's interesting because if you look at even Mandalore, the planet itself. The reason why they live in dome structures like they do is because the entire planet has been ravaged by years and years of internal strife and conflict, right? It's just taken this, huge toll. And as they're, on the edge of extinction and completely, scattered into the stars, there's obviously things to be gained by the way, but there's also limiting factors as a result that could lead to more conflict later. So I think Bo-Katan is on this path of reforming the church, let's say, uniting the clans, and I think, and she has to redeem herself, right? Because she tried that before, didn't quite work out.
Oh.
And she's still living with this. It's interesting. I was listening to an interview with the actress who plays Bo-Katan. And she was saying, yeah, she still feels this kind of guilt for being part of Death Watch and being part of what ultimately resulted in the death of her sister. So she's looking to overcome that as well. And so this while there is a kind of rebirth or a baptism or a shedding off of sins that Din Djarin physically went through, I think that this is going to be a story point with her as exemplified through these episodes.
Yeah, and it's good to mention too that Katie Sackhoff as an actress is phenomenal. And I don't know if you guys, you probably watched Battlestar Galactica, but she was the primary character in Battlestar Galactica back in the day. So it's fun to see her continue her career off from Battlestar Galactica into Star Wars. It's fun to see.
Redemption.
Yeah, exactly.
And not only that, but actually getting to portray the live action version of the character she played in Clone Wars.
Yes.
Not everybody gets to do that. And so it's
Very
just like
rare.
that. Yeah.
Just like The Last
very
of Us.
Cool.
No, all those characters were recast. All those voice actors were recast into other roles in The Last of Us. One of the things that I think that the Bo-Katan character arc is the most compelling thing about season 3 of The Mandalorian.
Absolutely.
And I think that's true because we kind of know that the covert they're not effective. Now, what do I mean by that? They are so fundamentalist that they can't even really interact with the normal world in any way, shape, or form that is consistently good, right? So we know that that they need to be pulled out of that that ideology that they have. Din is sort of in this middle ground where he's like, he lacks a little bit of focus. He's not exactly sure what mission he's on because he knows he's Grogu's dad, and then besides that, just wants to be a good Mandalorian, whatever that happens to mean. So Bo-Katan is the more interesting one. And I think one of the things that they did in this episode that I really liked was not only did they give potentially Thrawn or Moff Gideon a reason to destroy her palace, but that was instrumental for her character to understand, I now do not have a home anywhere. I could have claimed that I had a home in this palace, and I could have claimed that everybody else is a complete idiot, and I'm the only one that sees the future of Mandalore clearly, and they just won't be my followers. And what they're doing is they're putting her in a place where she goes, actually, join the covert. You actually are redeemed. And now how do you lead from a place where you actually resent some of the people that you now need to connect with so that they will follow you? And I think that that's a really good place because, again, as I talked about earlier with deconstruction is easy. She's already done that part. She's already done the deconstruction part. She knows what part of the Mandalorian lore, what part of the Mandalorian references are basically bullshit. What she hasn't done is she hasn't figured out, how do I get a group of people to follow me because my vision is compelling and my vision is inclusive. And my vision will result in the people of Mandalore being able to experience something really powerful by being reconnected to their origins. And I think that's where this story is going to take us. I think it's really compelling. I think it's really interesting. I do want to give out a quick shout out to Elia. Elia, if you're watching this after it's been live, Elia has a fantastic little thread where she has been posting some of the things that Katie has been talking about her character. So I highly recommend if you're rewatching, just click now on the live chat button and you can go see all of that thread and listen to some of what Katie Sackhoff had to say about her own character that she's portraying. Anything else you guys want to talk about with this episode? Because we have covered this pretty thoroughly. Is there anything else that we need to cover?
One of the things I want to make mention of just real quickly is the living waters and so forth. We saw that she added a little bit of a liquid to every single piece of armor that she actually, the armorer actually constructed, right? It was like, what is all that about? Well, if you look into Mandalorian lore, you know that the living waters is an essential resource and literally they can't make armor without it. To have her actually clarify that and know what the living waters actually looks like when it's poured and so forth and that kind of resin, or basin. That was pretty cool. That was a pretty kind of like, ooh, in-lore touch right there. You know, it's probably going to go over everybody's heads, but I thought that was a nice touch to kind of like round that story out because, well, it's not necessarily essential storytelling, but it's kind of a cool.
Well, and it also harkens back to our conversation last week about about the comparisons to the church, the early church.
Yes.
Well, one of the comparisons that you can find here, not to the early church, but to the later church, is this covert is almost functioning as a version of the Knights Templar, who are imbuing all of their artifacts with holy water.
Right.
To be able to then go out. So, but they also, this is actually a fragmented part of something that has become bastardized from its original purpose, right? After the Crusades, the Knights Templar sort of went insane and started just collecting gold. Basically, they made it about that. Now, I don't think that's what this covert is doing, but there's some interesting side parallels there, I think, for sure.
Yeah.
So fantastic discussion here. Some really good stuff in the live chat as well. We didn't cover all the stuff. We tried to cover as much as we possibly could. Elia has since posted that she's going to put the link to the article that she referenced that I'm referencing from her live chat in the description down below. So definitely check that out. We also would love to hear your thoughts about episode 3 of The Mandalorian. So if you're watching this, if you're rewatching this, go ahead and leave us those thoughts in the comments down below. Tell us where you think we're right. Tell us where you think we're wrong. And we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. So with that, Megan, where can folks find you? Where can they listen to some of what you've got going on?
You guys can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at the Menguin. That's TheMenguin. As I said at the top of the show, I have a YouTube channel called Silver Screams where me and my roommate talk about horror things. And I have a Lost retrospective podcast called No Love Lost, where my co-host Wellink loves Lost and I don't, and we talk about it.
Perfect. And hopefully we'll have Megan back on an upcoming show. So you'll hopefully get to see more of Megan talk about The Mandalorian.
And Jay, if you ever want to talk about Evil Dead.
You know what? I have been watching more and more horror just because, I've been really appreciative of the what do they call it? The Flaniverse, the Mike Flanagan's whole verse. It's great stuff. So you never know. Dre, where can people find you?
Best place to find me is going to be at VashGuy on Twitter. It's right down there. Just go ahead, type that in. It should pop up for, as Christine Wastelands McCarthy would say, for all the robust discussion right there. And if you want to see me, well, it's going to be on the channel you're watching right now at Orange Grove 55, where we have some great shows like the one you're watching here with Story Geeks with Jay, as we break down this entire season as these episodes are released. I think you'll really get a kick out of our not only this discussion, but future discussions for sure. We also have, above me, we have Orange Grove 55's original programming, where we go into all of the parks and everything connected to them, whether that be C-Suite, whether that be the studio, all kinds of different things. And we like to delve into that on Orange Nerd, actually. And then we also have a show called Citrus Corner, where we delve into everything Walt Disney World, and my own, Freshly Squeezed, your source for juicy news and info, squeezed fresh, right from the Grove. Let's see right here.
There we go. There we
So
go.
You know what, Dre? I think that's the best bargain of them all.
Oh,
Yeah.
it is. Hold on.
Gee,
We
go
got
ahead.
that. We got that drop. Take it away, Walt.
And there's the biggest bargain of all.
Perfect.
There we go.
It's
There it
perfect.
is. Perfect. And OG, where can people find you?
You can find me right here at Orange Grove 55 on YouTube. You can find me on Twitter at Orange Grove 55. And Megan, you are absolutely welcome back on the show. Had a blast talking Star Wars with you. Definitely have you back on if you want to talk theme parks too. Hey, come on, we can talk theme parks, whatever. But it was really great having you on. And also, I just want to leave everybody with a little something, something. There you go.
Perfect. That is perfect.
I
That is
am
perfect.
altering the deal. Pray I don't alter it any further.
Watch it.
We're having a roadcaster off right now.
Yeah,
you know?
roadcaster.
Yeah, exactly. Just keep pressing all the buttons. I do want to also just thank Michael Ebba for showing up. I want to thank Slimer for showing up. I want to thank Elia Aloha for showing up. I want to thank Captain John D, who thinks the show has jumped the shark. So we want to hear more from you about that, John D, as this show continues to move. And who else did we miss up here?
Doc was on there. Matthew Moore
Doc
was on there.
The Rogue Attraction was on there.
Oh, yes,
Yes.
California Dreamin'.
California Dreamin', Drunk 3PO. And speaking of Drunk 3PO, my segue into talking about where you can find me. You can find me on this channel, on the Story Geeks. But you can also find me How Stories Work with Jay Sherer, where I talk to writers, storytellers, producers, directors, novelists, screenwriters. You should be over on that channel, and I am actually interviewing Drunk 3PO about his new graphic novel. That'll be coming out on Tuesday, so definitely follow me over there to check that out. In the meantime, it was a pleasure talking with all of you. Fantastic stuff. Stay tuned for next week's discussion where we're covering episode 4. Other than that, thank you for watching, everybody, and we will see you all later. Bye.